Good morning, everybody. It's 9 o'clock, and 9 o'clock is with me, Father Warner. We are in the Tuesday of the 6th week of Easter. Our text is taken from Acts chapter 16, verses 22 to 34, and our title today is Kneeling to God but Standing to Men. Kneeling to God but Standing to Men. Let's read the text first. Acts chapter 16, verse 22 to 34. The crowd joined in attacking them, and the magistrates had them stripped of their clothing and ordered them to be beaten with rods. After they had given them a severe flogging, they threw them into prison and ordered the jailer to keep them securely. Following these instructions, he put them in the innermost cell and fastened their feet in the stocks. About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the prisoners was listening to them. Suddenly there was an earthquake so violent that the foundations of the prison were shaken, and immediately all the doors were opened and everyone's chains were unfastened. When the jailer woke up and saw the prison doors wide open, he drew his sword and was about to kill himself, since he supposed that the prisoners had escaped. But Paul shouted in a loud voice, "Do not harm yourselves, for we are all here." The jailer called for the lights, and rushing in, he fell down trembling before Paul and Silas. Then he brought them outside and said, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" They answered, "Believe in the Lord Jesus, and you will be saved, you and your household." They spoke the word of the Lord to him and to all who were in his house. At the same hour of that night, he took them and washed their wounds. Then he and his entire family were baptized without delay. He brought them up into the house and set food before them, and he and his entire household rejoiced that he had become a believer in God. The word of the Lord. Now, even though today's pericope begins with verse 22 and ends at verse 34, I would suggest that you spend some time and read the entire section. Read it from verse 16, which begins with the title Paul and Silas in Prison, and read it right till the end of the chapter, which ends with verse 40. And this will help you to get a better understanding. Now, the Acts of the Apostles records the second incident that takes place in Philippi. Remember that Paul and Silas wanted to go to Ephesus, and the Lord then sent them off to Macedonia, specifically to Philippi. We know Philippi was the center, one of those Roman centers, cities of great importance. Now, Paul and Silas are once again on their way to pray at the very area that they met Lydia. Remember Lydia of yesterday's narrative, this lady, a businesswoman as I called her, who dealt in purple cloth. Paul and Silas go to the riverside because there was no synagogue in Philippi, and there they meet Lydia, who, listening to them preach, becomes a believer. Now, in today's narrative, and that's why I said read the entire text, Paul and Silas are followed by a slave girl who has the ability of divination, and brought, obviously because of her powers to tell you of what would happen in the future, she brought her masters, her owners, a great deal of money by telling people's fortunes. Now, it is she who proclaims that Paul and Silas are slaves of the Most High God. And we are told she does this for many days. She follows them around, proclaiming them as slaves of the Most High God. Now, as a consequence, Paul, in annoyance, casts out of this girl, of the slave girl, in the name of Jesus Christ, the spirit that dwells within her, making her unable from now on to tell people's fortunes, and thus because she can't tell people's fortunes anymore, it causes her owners a huge financial loss. Now, let's come to the question of why did Paul get annoyed with this woman, with the slave girl? There is no reason actually for him to be annoyed, because she is following Paul and Silas. And after all, she hails them, as we can see in the verse, she hails them as slaves of the Most High God. Now, excuse me. Now, this title, Slaves of the Most High God, is found in Luke Acts. It's found in Luke chapter 1, verse 31, in Luke chapter 1, verse 35, in Acts, also verse 76. So, we've seen this title before, Slaves of the Most High God. The answer as to why he gets annoyed is found in the second part of her address. For she goes on to say that Paul and Silas proclaim a way of salvation. A way of salvation. Yeah? So, read that verse from 17. While she followed Paul and us, she would cry out, "These men are slaves of the Most High God, who proclaim to you a way of salvation." Now, clearly, the words "a way of salvation" that we see in our text in verse 17, a way of salvation suggests that this is one of the many ways to be saved and not the only way of salvation. And Paul and Silas preach only one way of salvation, that is namely Jesus. And that is the reason why Paul casts out from this girl, this slave girl, her power of divination. Now, as a result of this huge financial loss, the owners of the slave girl are obviously going to be upset with Paul and Silas. They were making money out of Paul and Silas. And so now they seize and drag them to the marketplace before the magistrate. Now, ironically, they never mention the loss caused to them as a result of the slave girl being set free from the spirit. It is a series of, therefore, if you look and read a series of trumped up charges, read verse 20, will give you, it says, when they brought them before the magistrate, they said, "These men are disturbing our city as they are Jews." They are trumped up charges. The owners never say, "Look, Paul and Silas have taken away the spirit from this girl and we can no longer make money from her." So Paul and Silas, they are accused of disturbing the city, practicing customs that are not lawful, imposing a Jewish way of life on Roman citizens, all trumped up charges. Now, strangely, no fair trial is conducted. For had it been done, then these accusations would have been proven false. For we know that Paul and Silas are both Roman citizens, and they don't declare it now, they will declare it very cleverly in verse 37. But for the moment, lawlessness and greed whipped up by racial and religious profiling, which happens so often all over the world, takes center stage, and it takes center stage over the truth. Yeah, today people fall for racial profiling, religious profiling, and nobody wants to hear the truth. So it reminds me of the many nations in the world where people undergo religious persecution under the guise of breaking civil law, charges that are really bigoted and have no reality in truth. And this is even more ironic when these nations are secular and democratic in their constitutions, but so bigoted in their practices of their religious politics. And we see that even in our own nation here in India. Now, Paul and Silas are not only, we are told, beaten with rods, mind you, but they are placed in the innermost cell and their feet are shackled in chains. We'll read this in verse 23 onwards. They are given a severe flogging and thrown into prison, and the jailer is asked to keep them secure. Yet, what are they doing? In their pain and their anguish, we are told that Paul and Silas are singing hymns. They are praying to God. I want you to take a moment and let that sink in. What is it that we do in moments of pain and anguish? For Paul and Silas, they did what they knew brought them comfort. They turned to the Lord, and the Lord releases them from prison by shaking the very foundations of the earth. That is what God does for us when we cry out to Him. He shakes the entire earth for us. Now, we are told that the jailer, supposing that the prisoners had escaped, is about to take his own life, knowing that he will be punished for dereliction of duty. In those days, dereliction of duty was a serious thing. You would be put to death. And so he wants to take his own life rather than be put to death. And he stopped by Paul and Silas from taking his life. They have been freed, but they have not run away. Also, I want to make a point here. If you notice that Paul and Silas are praying and all the other prisoners are listening, Paul and Silas never lost an opportunity to evangelize. Every opportunity. I met some years ago, I met a gentleman who told me he himself had gone through a conversion process. He had embraced Christianity. And then he told me, he said, Father, I never lose an opportunity to evangelize. He said, I sit in an auto rickshaw, I talk to them about Jesus. I go to a workplace, I talk to them about Jesus. He said, anywhere I go, I talk to them about Jesus. And I felt very ashamed because I keep asking myself, to whom do I talk? Sometimes we as Catholics do not talk to each other about Jesus. We never share our faith experiences. And Paul and Silas in prison are singing hymns and praising God. And we are told, the prisoners, listen to this, verse 25, about midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the prisoners were listening to them. The prisoners were not telling them at midnight, shut up and go to sleep. They must have been in awe of these two who were beaten with rods, thrown into prison, knowing that Paul and Silas were innocent, and they are still praying. Now, they are not the only ones moved, because the jailer is so moved by this great incident that he takes Paul and Silas home. He washes the wounds of the apostles, asking them to help him to be saved. Paul and Silas should have been saying, save us from our torment. Now it's the jailer who's saying, save me. And we are told that his whole household is baptized. The narrative of today now enters its third and final phase. In the morning, the magistrate releases Paul and Silas, only to be told that they now are not going to go. Paul and Silas says, we are not going to go. You've released us, very good, but we are not going to go. And why? Because as I said, they reveal in verse 37 that they are Roman citizens. But Paul replied, they have beaten us in public, uncondemned men who are Roman citizens, and have thrown us into prison. So he now reveals that we are not going to go, we refuse to go, we are Roman citizens, and a grave injustice has been done to us. We were not given a right to present our case, we were beaten, we were thrown in prison. And realizing that he had acted in haste and punished a Roman citizen without both a fair trial and an unjustified beating, the magistrate is now worried. He makes haste, he comes to the apostles apologizing, and he says, can you please leave the city? Now, it is wonderful to see the apostles stand their ground in the face of a tyrannical and unjust rule. In all of this, the slave girl, the reason for why we have begun this whole discussion, has disappeared. There is no more mention made of her. She who had no real power, no real status, was a slave to both a number of people who profited from her and also a slave to a spirit that tormented her. Now there is no sign of her. Although the Bible makes no mention of what happens to her, one thing we know, that Paul and Silas set her free. There are many things, my dear brothers and sisters, to think about today. It's a very, very rich reading. That's why I suggest you read it from verse 16 all the way down to verse 40, and then listen once again to my teaching, because you'll get a proper understanding. But there are so many takeaways. Our own role with regard to our pain and suffering. How do we accept pain and suffering in our lives? Our own role of evangelizing, sometimes even bearing testimony of what Jesus has done. And I say this very humbly, I do not think Catholics testify at all. I think Catholics are even afraid to forward 9 o'clock with Father Warner to other friends, because I don't know how many of them even listen to it. I know I send it out to more than 2,500 people. How do I know 2,500 people are not listening to it? Because I can see very clearly that 2,000 people have actually watched it. And then, of course, many of you are sending it out to others. People don't want to evangelize. We have become almost ashamed of our faith. We don't want to study our faith. We don't want to learn our faith. We hardly know our scriptures. We hardly know our tradition. We hardly know the catechism of the Catholic Church. And I bemoan the fact that very often homilies from the pulpit are story time and how do I help you to make your life better, and joke time. The faith today is struggling and suffering because we do not have that fervor and zeal of St. Paul and Silas. That zeal and fervor has gone. And sadly, I sometimes think it has gone even from us clergy and religious. We joined because we love the Lord. And today, sometimes it's so hard, we keep complaining. Life is not easy for us priests, but hey, it's not that difficult either. And neither is it for y'all as lay people, if you're watching this. I want to encourage you, ask yourself, what have you done for Jesus Christ today? Jesus Christ does so much for you and me. You must ask yourself, what have I done for Jesus today? What have I done? So don't forget to leave your comments, like this video, share it with your friends. For those of you who are just tuning in perhaps today, like to subscribe to this channel, do that. I want to continue to thank our donors, both to this ministry and to the Love, Joy, Hope Foundation for Children. If you'd like to offer a meal for the children of the Love, Joy, Hope Foundation, you can send me a WhatsApp message and I will forward you their details. But on behalf of Lenny and Nadia Suarez, I want to thank you. Want to tell you that Nadia has to go through a surgery, so it's managing the home, managing the children. It's quite a challenge for them, but they do this joyfully. Right now, many of their children of the home also go home because they have one parent. They spend the summer vacation with their families, and then they come back in around the 1st of June to start a new academic year. So do support these children. Today I want to pray for two people in a very special way. I want to pray for my dear friend Sheldon from Mari Nagar in Mahim, who celebrates his birthday today. Sheldon's one of the most creative people I know, a great designer, designs some most fantastic wedding gowns, but a human being of great kindness, of great love, of great joy. It's going to be a difficult birthday for Sheldon because he recently lost his mother, who he was very attached to, greatly loved, greatly cared for, nursed her, looked after her, fed her through her illness. So happy birthday, Sheldon. It's been 22 years that I've known you, and I'm proud to call you my friend. And I also want to pray today in a special way for Father Edwin Gonsalves. Father Edwin is in Toronto. He's the rector of the seminary in the Diocese of Toronto, St. Augustine's. And Eddie and I we joined the seminary together, and we shared the same room in the first year till his family moved to Toronto. He's done very well for himself. Eddie, I know one day you'll become a bishop. I know that. A good man, good heart, loving priest, cares for his people, deeply rooted to God, a deep man of faith, and the most funniest priest I know. Yeah, always full of mischief, always full of love. And that's how priesthood should be. Yeah, rooted to Christ, but rooted in joy and love. Happy birthday, Eddie. I know last week you were giving a retreat to priests. God bless you, God keep you, God preserve you. And I really want to thank God for you in my life. Have a nice day, everybody else who's watching. Keep well. Once again, don't forget to like this video and leave your comments. I'll see you tomorrow again, 9 o'clock with Father Warner.